All right, so today I'm sharing with you a sequence that I just titled Quiet Yin. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be quiet or that you need to be quiet, um, but it's just a well-rounded yin practice. It doesn't have any particular focus. So I can't call it hip flow. I can't call it spine flow. It's not really any of those things. Um, if there were a physical emphasis, it would probably be the spine. Um, Energetically, it covers the lower body meridians. And so, again, it's just a well-rounded practice. And what this allows us to do is to perhaps focus more on what we're feeling in the moment and to let that guide us. When we're doing a hip flow, we want to focus on the hips. So if we're feeling some kind of thing happening in our spine in a certain pose, we don't want that to override what we're doing with the hips because that's the focus of that particular practice. But what's beautiful about a practice like today is whatever I sort of feel going on in my body, I can use the postures to try and address that, okay, for lack of a better way of putting it. As usual, you're welcome to play whatever kind of music you like in the background. I recommend relaxing, soothing, calming music. Some of you know I began releasing music on my YouTube and Patreon pages that you can play in the background while we do these practices if you like. And that music is written in a way that it's supposed to fit perfectly this kind of a practice. It's meant to be sort of in the background, almost like incense. Like if you're burning incense while you're doing yoga, you don't want all your attention on the incense. The incense just creates an atmosphere, a pleasant smell that's sort of in the background to enhance what you're doing. And that's exactly how we want the music to be in a practice like this. Just sort of in the background, not too loud. It's not overwhelming us. It's not distracting us. It just creates an atmosphere in which we can practice. Okay, so we're going to start with a butterfly pose. There are two main variations for this posture. Heels in close is more of a groin, the inside of the thighs. Stretch for the groin, and feet out is more for the spine. So you can do either one. As usual, we relax forward and down, so I'm not pulling myself here. I could use a prop underneath my forehead, forearms, or torso, or knees to support. I could sit on a block to push myself forward more aggressively if I choose to. Okay, so coming on up out of that, we have another pose before we'll rest or rebound, the dragonfly. So taking the legs straight and wide as they'll go, and then coming right down the center. And again, stretching the groin and then also the back. Again, I could use support underneath my forearms, forehead. But as usual, I don't want too much support. So if I have support, but I don't feel the stretch, that's too much. If I come into the pose and there's a lot of pain and I have to come out of the pose because it's too intense, then that's not enough support. Okay, so use just enough support so that you can stay in the posture the whole time without coming out of it, but still feel the stretch in the inside of the thighs. Okay, please take your time unwinding back onto your back, and we will relax there for a few moments. And again, as usual, we call that a rebound. All right, and then from our rebound, we move into our next posture. But before we do that, let's go ahead and just give our legs a nice squeeze. Move around a little bit. And then hinge down. Now we move into banana pose, which generally stretches the side and works the gallbladder channel. To do this posture, I recommend moving your hips over to the right edge of your mat to start. And then you can take your left leg, move it over to the left, and then just cross the right ankle over the left without allowing the hip to raise up off the ground. Extending your arms overhead, you reach up and you grab your right wrist with your left hand, and then you can move or scoot everything over to the left as much as possible until you feel a stretch in your right waist and ribs. That might extend down into your hip as well, the side of your hip, and that's perfectly good. It's beneficial if that you feel that. If not, it's okay, don't worry about it. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, since this isn't spine flow, it isn't torso flow, it isn't hip flow, we can come into banana and just make sure we're feeling the influence in the general area, but we can also notice what else we feel. Maybe this stretches your ankle or the side of your leg, or maybe you get a stretch in your upper arm. Maybe bending your arms and grabbing the elbow instead of grabbing the wrist is better for you. Maybe playing around with the position of your head. Again, the way I describe the postures, the way I use them are the ways that they are commonly used. They are tools, but oftentimes tools are used in ways that were not intended. And a great example of this is in music. So one example of this is the guitar amplifier. The guitar amplifier, when the electric guitar was invented, people thought that the guitar amplifier's only job, was to recreate the sound of the electrical signal coming from the magnetic pickups in the guitar. So what the people working on the electric guitar and the guitar amplifier were thinking is, let's just make a guitar and just make it louder. Well, at this stage, I think most of us know that the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar sound very different, if you have any sort of knowledge about music at all. The reason they sound different is partly because of the guitar amplifier. The early guitar amplifier distorted the sound of the guitar. It did not recreate it accurately. It created what's called distortion. It created all sorts of overtones and sounds that were not present in the original signal. Now, early guitar amp manufacturers were trying to eliminate distortion. They were doing everything they could to try and get rid of this sound. But what was happening amongst musicians is some musicians were using this sound creatively. So eventually, in the late 70s, when manufacturers were able to create amplifiers that accurately recreated the sound of the electric guitar, most guitar players and most listeners found that they did not like the sound without the distortion. They preferred the sound of the distorted electric guitar. And so this is an example of where tools that were sort of designed to do one thing were co-opted, and they were used by creative people in a different way. The shortcomings of the tools that were invented to create music were actually used to help express creativity. There are other examples of this in electronic music. There are all kinds of examples of this where musicians use the quirks and the shortcomings of their musical instruments creatively. And those creative shortcomings actually became oftentimes the signature sound of these tools or these instruments. Let's switch sides. Okay, so moving the hips over to the left side, again, is a suggestion. It is not essential. Taking the right leg out and then bringing the left leg over, reaching up, grabbing the left wrist with the right hand. Again, all of this ultimately is suggestion. We're generally trying to target this left side. And again, there are all kinds of little tweaks and changes that we can make. So again, you might be asking, well, what does that have to do with this pose or yoga? What it has to do with what we're doing is you might find that while I encourage you to use banana pose for a stretch in your left waist, that maybe it gives you a stretch in your shoulder, and maybe that ends up being your favorite thing about doing this posture. And when you feel a certain kind of tension that comes into your body that maybe I don't feel in my body, in your shoulder, you end up doing this posture as a way of alleviating that pain or discomfort in your body. So I emphasize this because it's important that we don't completely discount our experience. Walking a spiritual path is a challenging one because we are, on the one hand, trying to weaken our relationship with our ego. And our ego often likes to tell us how we're different and how we're special. And it likes to pick and choose things. It likes choices. It likes to not listen to others. Some egos anyway. And so when a teacher maybe tells us to do something, we might find ourselves very resistant to doing that thing or questioning that thing. At least this is how some egos operate. Other egos might be just the opposite. They might find that they actually want to do everything someone else tells them, and they don't want to think for themselves. So we need to be on the lookout for this. Do we always resist instruction? Do we always resist listening to suggestions from others? Are we always at odds with authority, regardless of whether that authority is looking out for our best interest or not? At the same time, we need to be careful about blindly and mindlessly following and listening to authority. We do need to question things. We do need to see if what is being suggested to us actually matches up with our own experience and knowledge. So depending on our own proclivities, we need to be willing to notice when we are constantly resisting, instruction or resisting listening to what others suggest for us. And then at the same time, we need to notice if we are just blindly accepting what others suggest for us, tell us to do. Neither one of these are the answer. If someone suggests something to us, I suggest that we be open to trying it and to seeing if it works for us. At the same time, we want to be very awake. Is the description that the teacher is giving to us, does that match up with our actual experience? And what you might find is maybe 90, even maybe 99% of the time it does. But then again, there might be these other things happening. Maybe you do feel the stretch here just as I described, but maybe again, you feel something in your shoulders or your neck or your toes. Or I had a student who had pain in her tailbone in this posture. And at least technically speaking, this should have nothing to do with your tailbone. And yet there it was. So again, sometimes our theory does not explain what we experience in reality, but we always want to defer to reality. Okay, let's go ahead and unwind from here back onto our back, and we will just relax. So we want to defer to reality, and at the same time, if you've been keeping up on my posts on Patreon page, over the last few weeks, I've posted many talks from TED Talks about examples of cognitive or perceptual bias. So we might think that we are seeing reality as it is. The truth might be far from the truth. The reality might be far from the truth. Okay? So again, as human beings, we just need to be aware of this. This is why science is so important and so powerful for us. Because science at its best allows us human beings to experience physical reality free of our own personal biases and limitations. The human system has many limitations and biases just built into it. There is not really a way around it other than, again, something like the scientific method, where we are trying to be aware of these limitations and we try and use the scientific method to get around them. Okay, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out, move around a little bit. And then when you're ready, hinge on up to seated. Let's come into a tabletop for a little bit of the bear pose. And when you're done with bear, into down dog. All right, from down dog, we'll come forward into a sphinx. Propping yourself up on your elbows in sphinx posture. We are either trying to gently compress the low back, stretch the front of the abdomen, or both. If you can do that on your elbows, great. If you can't, you might take your hands a little wider and straighten your arms for what we call seal pose. Okay. Now, if you don't want to hold yourself up the entire time in seal pose, another option is using props. Now, I know that not everyone has props at home, but I do recommend purchasing props if you don't have them. I don't think the pandemic is going anywhere anytime soon. And if you are one of the many people who are not comfortable practicing yoga in a yoga studio right now, then it's not a bad idea to have props at home for you to use. Even if you come to a yoga studio, currently none of the studios I work at have props. It's just not safe for us to be borrowing props, sharing them with the coronavirus going around. So you need to check in once again and see for yourself, do I feel a stretch in my belly or a little bit of compression in my back or a little bit of both? The shoulders could be depressed or relaxed. The head could be held up. It can be dropped forward. It can be dropped back. The legs could be together or apart. And once again, because today we aren't focused or hyper-focused on spine or hips or a particular energetic channel, we can open our mind up a little more exploratory. So again, if I drop my head forward, I can stretch the back of my neck. Well, maybe that becomes the most important thing in today's class. Maybe I feel tension in my neck, and this gives me a nice stretch in the back of the neck. Or relaxing my shoulders, maybe I feel it stretches out some of the muscles in my shoulder. So again, this is that creative use of the postures I was describing earlier. Our bodies are all different. And even though maybe this posture was quote unquote designed to compress our back, stretch the front of the abdomen, we might find that it does something unique for us or special for us or different that we appreciate and we want to emphasize. And again, this is what many artists have done with music. They have taken their musical instruments and used them in unconventional ways and come up with new styles and new approaches. And what was once the wrong way to do things can become actually the right way or the more popular way of doing things. Another example of this is a musician, very famous musician, you probably heard of him, named Miles Davis. Miles Davis went to Juilliard, and when he took lessons at Juilliard, his trumpet teacher told him that he was the worst trumpet student he ever had. Miles Davis started playing music when a style of jazz called bebop was very popular, which is very fast and very virtuosic style of playing. And he was not a very good bebop musician. He then got a bunch of musicians together and created a style called cool jazz, which is a kind of laid back, slower style of jazz. You might say it was jazz yin and bebop was jazz yang. By the time Miles Davis had finished his career or was at the height of his career, his style of playing had become the predominant one. Whereas when he started, that very yang approach was the popular predominant one. So he took his sort of imperfect way of playing and actually turned that into a popular style. Okay, So go ahead and come on down. If you're wondering why I'm giving so many musical examples, again, it's just because I'm a musician. I have been my whole life. It's something I know a lot about. But it does apply very, very well. If you know some of what I'm talking about, you might understand, and it illustrates the point very well. If we're doing yoga, and again, we're doing it wrong or poorly, or we're experiencing something different than what the teacher or the books are telling us, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or bad. While we want to understand what the teacher is saying, we want to explore what the books are suggesting, we don't want to be trapped by that. We don't want to invalidate our own real experience. Again, sometimes our ego tries to tell us we're having a different experience just because it wants to be a little jerk, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I want to be clear, all egos are little jerks. So I'm not saying your ego is a jerk and someone else's ego is nice. Basically, that's just what the ego is. It's a big jerk. And generally, we all have one until we're enlightened. So the best thing we can do is be aware of this little jerk that we have inside of us. And the reason we have morals and ethics and laws usually is try and control this little jerk so that it doesn't go around and piss other people off and cause havoc, right? We can see the ego working in little children, and we try and teach them, don't do that. That isn't nice. That isn't kind. All right, let's go ahead and press back to a kneeling position. Now you can sit on your heels, between your heels, or on a block that is between the heels. You can pad your feet and your ankles if they hurt, pressing into the ground here. If your knees hurt, I recommend sitting up on something, and you can also experiment with taking your knees wider apart. We want to be sure to do this posture in a way that the feet, ankles, and knees are not in duress. They're not being hurt or injured by doing this pose, okay? All right, once you have made your feet, ankles, and knees relatively comfortable, and I do want to mention your feet can point out to the sides as well, then you want to see about stretching the front of your thighs and also potentially compressing your low back. Again, these are the two main things that this posture does for us. However, you might discover something else about it. I'm not sure what that would be, but again, we don't want to limit ourselves, our conception of the posture. So see if you feel the stretch, and if you do not, begin lowering back to your hands, elbows, maybe onto a bolster, the crown of your head, or all the way back onto your back, as I am doing. And this is called the full saddle pose. As I mentioned earlier, generally the saddle stretches the front of the thighs. It nutates the SI joint. It gently compresses the lumbar spine. But you might discover something unique about it. If you bring your arms up overhead, you might be able to stretch the front side of your body, and stretching the front of your body is a good idea. Generally, in modern life, we compress the front of the body. We live sort of slumped over. And so anything we can do to help open up the front of the body, stretch it out, is not a bad idea. It's a good idea to take advantage of that. And this posture is a great way to do that. Again, what might you notice about this posture that I haven't mentioned? It's an interesting question. Maybe you feel something unique in your upper back or your neck. maybe in your shoulders, your ankles, your knees. While we don't want the ankles and knees to be in pain, this could be potentially therapeutic for the ankles and the knees. Okay, it's not generally the way we use the posture, but again, we want to be very careful about limiting. Imagine if when the electric guitar amplifier was invented and these blues and rock musicians turned up their amplifiers so that they intentionally distorted. And then the manufacturer came along and said, that's not how it was designed to be used, and took the amplifier away from the musician. Okay, can you imagine? This is what some people in yoga are trying to do. They're trying to say, you can't use that pose unless you do it correctly. And they want to tell you the correct way to do the pose. By doing this, they're sort of limiting the potential of the posture to what they can understand. And I think this is a dangerous thing. And I think it is unnecessary. Very often, this is justified in the name of safety. And you'll find that safety is used to justify all kinds of things. Torture, right? We're trying to keep you safe. And this person, we suspect this person is a terrorist. So we are going to torture them to get the information from them so we can keep you safe. We are going to wiretap everybody and do surveillance on everybody so that we can keep everybody safe. So if there are any bad actors, we will know about it. It's a very old story. Human beings like the idea of safety. They like the idea of control. They like the idea of order. And so when someone steps forward and says, I can offer you that, but you're going to have to give me something in return. And that is your freedom. That is, you're going to have to do things the way I want you to keep you safe. Many people think that that is a reasonable exchange. So it's no different in yoga. When teachers come along and say, hey, you're doing that pose incorrectly, and you are going to hurt yourself if you do that. You're doing it wrong. This is the right way. This is the safe way. Many of us want to listen. But again, this is a little bit like the guitar amplifier manufacturer coming along and saying, hey, you can't use the amplifier in that way. Now, granted, we don't want to do postures in a way that's dangerous. But in my experience, these ideas of safety, they're limited. What might be safe for one person might be dangerous for another person, and vice versa. So in almost every instance of me hearing someone talk universally about safety, I find that it isn't ultimately true. For instance, my feet are pointing out to the side. I've been doing this pose this way for a long, long time, over a decade. I've never had any problem with my knees or my hips or my back as a result of it. If anything, it has helped me heal problems with my knees and hips and back, ankles. Yet, I have read articles that say, don't ever do this pose in this way. It was only by my teacher telling me that it's okay that I felt the freedom to approach the posture in this way. So again, while it's true, some people should never, ever, ever do this. If they were, they would break their ankles or their knees. Okay? That's true for some people. But to say that nobody can do the pose in this way is obviously incorrect. For me, this is a very therapeutic position because of the uniqueness of my hips, because my hips can do this. this is helpful. So this is again where we want to be very careful about having a little bit of information and saying, ooh, this person was hurt doing this, so no one should do that, right? Again, this idea of safety. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that. Take your time, unwind onto your back. Let's feel that rebound. So again, this is something that we find that happens in yoga, it happens in politics, right? Lots of leaders come along and tell us that they'll keep us safe. It happens in medicine as well. You know, people will come along and say, you have to do this, you have to do that. My approach is, again, one of education. I try and educate people about what their options are, what some of the consequences of those options are likely to be. But then I ask them to really be present in their own experience and to decide for themselves. And I feel that in a more awake society, this is how things would be approached. Hopefully, we would have less laws. We would have less things where people are being forced to follow certain rules. And instead, people will be educated about what the consequences of following or not following certain behaviors or courses of action are. And they would hopefully see the benefit of following or doing things that generally benefit themselves and other people. All right, let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze, shake it out. And then we'll finish with the twisted roots. So the right knee over the left, and we drop our knees down to the left side. Now again, when we hear about a, society without lots of rules or laws, we think that it's going to be anarchy. And again, as long as the ego is strong and in charge, you're probably right. And this is why most cultures and societies have rules and laws. We have to teach or kind of rein in the worst impulses of the ego. We have to rein these in because a raging ego can start a war. It can kill and maim. It can do very cruel and evil, mean things to other people. And to itself, actually. So what we do is we try and teach, or again, to rein in the ego using certain rules and laws, 10 commandments, things of this nature. Don't ever do this. Don't kill. Don't steal. We have them in yoga as well. And on a societal level, these things end up as laws, right? However, if you understand what teachers like Eckhart Tolle or Osho or Krishnamacharya, Buddha, Jesus, what they were teaching is they were teaching about a potential that we have as human beings to transcend the ego. They teach that it's not our ultimate destiny to live with the ego. That not only on an individual level, but on a collective level, we are ultimately one day meant to emerge from this transitionary period of egoic consciousness into a more awake version of humanity, a more enlightened version, which will be either free of the ego or where the ego will be very much understood and will not have the kind of free reign that it does when we are unconscious. Once we're awake, we can see the ego at work and we can begin to, you might say, work around it. So once we're in that stage, you find that there's much less of a need for these types of harsh do's and don'ts, these sort of rigid laws where, again, we say that this is in order to keep us safe. This is in order to have order, right? Can you imagine today if, with all the egos that we have running around, if we just lifted the law on killing and we said, you know, you're not going to go to jail if you kill, just be responsible. It would be a nightmare, right? People would start killing and murdering for their own benefit. They would kill a rich person and try and take their belongings. It would just be anarchy. But this is, again, only conceivable from an egoic perspective. The egoic perspective is one of separation, where what is good for me is not good for you. What is good for you is not good for me. And that couldn't really be further from the truth in reality. Again, science is beginning to show that this is the case. More and more, we are interconnected. Humanity has gotten to the point where it is beginning to damage the very home that we live in, the earth. We have expanded and taken the earth's resources so quickly and so extensively that the earth can no longer manage and keep up with the amount of waste and damage and resources that we are taking and creating. And so humanity likely faces a turning point. We're likely at a turning point right now, where if we can collectively wake up enough, we can avoid making our home inhospitable to ourselves. It's likely the planet and some of the life forms on the planet will survive no matter what. But the human race may not if we do not wake up. Okay, let's switch sides. Okay, so left knee over right, and we drop the knees down to the right side. So when you hear me talk about that, I am talking about that in a very matter-of-fact way. And the reason that I do this is because the vast majority of scientific evidence supports this claim that we are contributing to global warming, and global warming, along with other things like, again, waste and plastics in the ocean and chemicals in the earth and fracking, trying to get every bit of oil we can from the earth. These practices are harmful to the environment, to other species, and even to ourselves. We actually, pump neurotoxins into the air that we then breathe. I mean, this is, I think, just retarded. It's stupid. But this is the ego. If I think I can make a little more money by not having to deal with the waste that I create, and I can pump that out into the earth into the air, even though I'm going to breathe it, my children are going to breathe it, my grandchildren are going to breathe it, and everyone else is going to breathe it. But I make a little more money. I make a little more profit. So who cares, right? This is, again, ego in its strongest form. And unfortunately, much of the business in our culture is run by very, very big egos right now. Just because someone has an ego, it doesn't make them a bad person. I want to be very clear about that. So this isn't a fight of good against evil or anything like that. And in fact, the more awake we are, generally the more compassion we feel for those that are not awake. We can see how somebody who is already wealthy, already powerful, thinks that it's in their own best interest to pump toxins into the environment, into the earth, to abuse the earth, to abuse other people, to abuse themselves even. Again, they're breathing the air. They're drinking the water. They are living on this planet that is heating up. For them to think that making some more profit, making some more money is worth doing that is absolutely insane. And you don't really have a choice but to feel sorry for someone who can be in that kind of a mindset, who could see things that way. It just is, you almost want to cry for them because it is a very limited perspective. And they see themselves as this small little dot, and the whole world is out there. And they want to make that little dot big. And in our culture, a lot of times the way people think that they can make that dot bigger is with money. Money, power, influence. So if I have a lot of money, I have a lot of power, I have a lot of influence, then my dot is bigger. But the funny thing about the ego is you can never make that dot big enough because it never really replaces your true identity, which extends far beyond that little dot. And when I'm talking about the dot, I'm talking about this body. I'm talking about your emotions. I'm talking about your thoughts, your mind, your opinions, your beliefs. We all have that dot experience. And there's nothing wrong with that dot experience, unless we think that that's the only experience. This is part of what yoga is all about, waking us up to our true nature. And when we wake up to our true nature, we realize we are not just this little dot. We are the dot and we are everything else. We are interconnected with all of life, all of existence. And what we do to the planet, what we do to other people, we do to ourselves, and it affects ourselves, not just the dot, but we ourselves, again, are the other dots. We no longer can see someone else suffering and not feel that as our own suffering. And this, again, in yoga is called awakening and enlightenment. And this is really the goal of these types of practices. Okay, we're going to unwind from that pose. We'll come back onto our back and rest for a moment. And then let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze and shake it out. Move around a little bit. So again, I'm not the only spiritual teacher talking about these things. Again, very popular author, Eckhart Tolle, he talks a lot about that in his talks and books. We are many spiritual teachers. We are on the precipice of something as a species. We have really sort of pushed to the limits of what the planet can likely handle and deal with. And it's possible that we will survive this, the human race will survive this, even if things get very, very bad. But wouldn't it be nice if we could wake up enough collectively and, as a result, avoid that kind of trauma to the planet and to our species? There's evidence in our genes that show that human race has come very close to extinction in the past, and is just sort of eked by. And now we are the apex predator. We are the most powerful species on the planet. But wouldn't it be nice if, given that stewardship, that we could do right by the planet and the other species on this planet and not abuse that position, which is exactly what we're doing today. Now, the biggest thing that you can do to help with that is yourself to wake up, to do your practices, to meditate, to take your spirituality seriously, and to do everything that you can to become more awake, to become more enlightened. Don't worry about other people, right? You're probably thinking, oh, well, these people who are fracking and these people who are polluting, don't worry about them. Just worry about yourself and do everything you can do to wake up, to cultivate love and compassion, patience, forgiveness. And with these things, you will do more to change the world than you can by going out and protesting or trying to change other people's minds. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's practice. I am organizing hikes, outdoor hikes with yoga, doing those Tuesdays, Thursdays, and on the weekends. If you'd like to be included in those text messages where I make the announcement, then send me your information. You can email it to me, or you can, if you've got my phone number, you can text me directly. Just let me know you want to be included, okay? And it's not going to be every Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday or Sunday. That's why you need to be in on the messages. I just have a list of people who are interested. I'll just send a text, and then we go from there, okay? So have a lovely week. I hope to see you next week at 4:45 for Vinyasa, 6 o'clock for Yin. If there are any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take a few minutes to just relax on your back. Namaste.